Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case we are covering today has to be one of the most shocking and inhumane cases I have come across that has happened in recent times. Like, I'm not kidding you here, today's case is truly horrific. It is mind-blowing how anyone can treat another human being like this. It's heartbreaking, it is infuriating, and at the same time, it's like a big mystery. Because back in 2022, police went to what they thought was just a regular family home. Just a regular family home, it looked really nice, it was a little cute house on a cul-de-sac. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. And when they entered the home, they went into the living room and they found the body of a woman that had literally rotted into the living room couch. Her body had started decomposing, there were maggots everywhere, she was covered in feces and urine, and the couch underneath this woman had also started to rot away. The leather on the couch had started to melt, the sofa foam was exposed, and this woman was literally fused into the sofa. It was literally like someone had melted this woman and she had become one with the couch. And the worst part of all of this is that this happened to this woman whilst she was still alive. This woman had been left in this condition on this sofa for 12 years. She was mistreated and neglected, and her parents were living in the same house. And this woman was called Lacey Fletcher. And you possibly have already heard the name Lacey Fletcher because this case is pretty recent and it made huge news when it broke.
We begin with a case that has been hard for even the most seasoned investigators to forget: the death of Lacey Fletcher.
And this case is truly shocking and horrific, and I cannot wrap my head around this case. Like, what happened? And that's what we are going to be diving into today. How did Lacey even end up in this condition, and how was it allowed to happen? So let's jump in. I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Audible. So I'm sure you guys remember, but we covered the case of Larry Ray a few weeks ago. The crazy college sex cult. I mean, how could you forget that video? And when I was doing my research on this case, I listened to an incredible audiobook called Sloan & Woods 9, which was about Larry Ray's college sex cult, and it was written by one of the cult members themselves. The book was written by Danielle, and he was the member that was really struggling with his sexuality, and Larry Ray manipulated him and convinced him that he was straight, and Danielle also received horrific abuse at the hands of Larry. Like, what Danielle went through is on another level. It's absolutely horrific. And Danielle has told his story. It's so engaging to hear it from Danielle's words himself. And I just feel like listening to this, it hits you harder. So if you want to know more about Larry Ray's sex cult, you need to go and listen to this audiobook. And Audible is the best place to go to listen to whatever you're interested in. Whether that is the best-selling audiobooks in every single genre, exclusive Audible originals, popular podcasts, and their mystery and thriller section is incredible. It is the place to go to for edge of your seat, thrilling audio entertainment, and it is definitely my favorite section. And if you guys wanted to go check this out, new members can try Audible for free by going to audible.com/Danielle. Again, that is audible.com/Danielle. I will leave the link in my description box, and using that link really does help out this channel because it lets Audible know that you came from this video, and then you can start listening to Sloan & Woods 9 right away, and I highly recommend it. So thank you again to Audible for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because truly without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. So today's case starts with a couple called Clay and Sheila Fletcher. They were both born in the late 50s. An exact date of birth is not known. And they lived in Louisiana, USA, which is where today's case takes place. And they had lived there their entire lives. And I wish I could tell you about their upbringing. I wish I could tell you how they met, their relationship. I was expecting to find some sort of trauma in their background to possibly even remotely explain what the hell happens in today's case, but nothing. I could not find anything. Despite all of my research and all of my digging, I couldn't find any information about the two of them. And I will say there are lots of parts of today's case where it's just one big mystery. So buckle up for that. However, what we do know is that Clay and Sheila lived in the town Slaughter, Louisiana. And side note, that is a very creepy name for a town. Slaughter. Like, no offense to anybody that possibly lives there, but wow, that is creepy. And literally just the other week, I was driving down a road that was called Cutthroat Lane. And I was like, what the hell? Like, what the hell? So yeah, Slaughter, kind of a creepy name, especially given what happens in today's case. Like, it's just all just so creepy. And Slaughter is a pretty small town. Like, the population is approximately 900 people, which is so tiny. It is one of those towns where everyone knows everyone. However, I did go on Google Maps, of course. I like to look around the area, and I did notice that a lot of the houses, they were pretty spread out. So even though it was one of those towns where everyone would know everyone, the houses are far enough apart where you could get away with some things and your neighbors don't find out, if you know what I mean. And whilst the couple lived in Slaughter, Clay Fletcher worked as an officer for the Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable. And then Clay's wife, Sheila, she worked as a police and county clerk for the nearby city of Baker. And she also worked as an assistant to the city prosecutor. And then later on in life, Sheila went on to become a town alderman, which is essentially just a member of the town's council. And she was elected by the fellow residents of Slaughter to represent their town. And eventually she would even become the town's vice mayor, which I've just got to pause for a second here, because given what happens in this case, that is just shocking in so many ways. The couple also went to church every single weekend, and they were very active in their community. They were well respected in the community. And it just really is so infuriating and shocking given how respected they are in the community, and then they go and do what they do. Sheila especially, because she works in law enforcement and she's the town vice mayor. It just makes this case even more unbelievable and mind-blowing. So now we get to the mid-80s. The couple were now both in their late 20s, and this is now where we need to talk about the couple's daughter, Lacey Fletcher, because Sheila falls pregnant, and on the 25th of November 1985, the couple welcomed their first child, which is a daughter, and they call her Lacey. And to the outside world, Sheila and Clay were the happiest parents. They were so proud of their daughter. They doted on their little girl Lacey. They gave her everything she wanted. And Lacey, from what we know, had a perfectly normal and happy childhood. It was then in the mid-90s where the family moved to a different home. They moved to a home on a cul-de-sac, and the home that they lived in, the area, it's very picturesque, it's very green, it just looks very peaceful and serene. And take note of this house, because this house is very significant to the rest of today's case, because whilst it looks all nice and picturesque and perfect, it becomes a house of horrors. And then whilst living in this home, Lacey had a pretty normal, happy childhood. I just again want to emphasize that we know of. Lacey was a student at Brownsville Baptist Academy, which is a small private school. And Lacey was described as an incredibly smart and bright student. She had a load of friends at school. She just got on with everyone. Everyone in the neighborhood just described her as really thoughtful, caring, kind, just the sweetest person you could ever meet. Lacey was also part of the volleyball team, the bowling league. She loved attending slumber parties with her friends. She was just a regular kid having fun. And then the two biggest passions in Lacey's life were country music and Disney. She would listen to country music all day long. She was also obsessed with Mariah Carey, and Disney was probably her biggest passion in life. She had all the Disney movies. She had Disney toys and teddies and clothes. She loved going to Disneyland. She would always be sending photos in her emails to her friends with her looking really happy on the rides at Disneyland. And Lacey can be seen in a yearbook picture from her 9th grade. So she's around 14, possibly 15, and she just looks so happy. But sadly, this would all completely change, because it was around this time where friends and neighbors have said that Lacey's behavior just suddenly changed. First of all, at some point during Lacey's childhood, I don't quite know exactly when, but she was diagnosed with autism, and I couldn't find out any information about her diagnosis. I just know it was severe autism, but I don't know how it affected her day-to-day life. However, it is said that because of her autism, Lacey faced quite significant bullying. It is also said that when Lacey was entering into her teenage years, her interests never really matured. It was almost like she was still like a young child. People have commented that she was still so obsessed with Disney, which personally, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's like, why is there an age restriction on what you should be interested in? However, Lacey didn't have any other mature interests. You know what I mean? It literally was like she was stuck as a child. And I don't know, but did this contribute to her bullying? Is this why children bullied her? I just don't know. However, another thing that we know about Lacey's childhood is that she also developed pretty severe social anxiety. She started leaving the house less and less. She started interacting with people less and less. Social interactions were becoming very, very difficult for her. She stopped wanting to attend large gatherings. She was struggling to make eye contact with people. She was even starting to shut out her friends who she was comfortable with, but even that was becoming difficult for her. And her parents took her to see a psychologist about this. And when she went to see the psychologist, they pointed out that Lacey had an extremely low IQ and that she also had severe autism. And Lacey saw this psychologist for 12 sessions, but then after those sessions, there was no more help. No more was done for Lacey. And then eventually, when Lacey got to the end of her 9th grade, her parents, Clay and Sheila, just pulled her out of school completely. And again, I don't know why they did this. Was it due to the bullying? Was the bullying that extreme that Lacey was pulled out of school? Was it something to do with her autism? Did she develop learning difficulties? Like, we just don't know. We don't know what the trigger was for it. However, for the rest of Lacey's childhood, her parents decided to homeschool her, which would now have a very negative impact on the rest of Lacey's life. Because as soon as Lacey was homeschooled, she was now rarely seen in public. She was occasionally seen to be hanging out with the other children in the neighborhood, but over time, even that started to become a rarity. She was leaving the house less and less. Lacey was now seen as a recluse, and as time went on, she was struggling more and more to interact with people. Her social anxiety was getting worse. And then when Lacey was 16 years old, her parents took her to see another doctor, and her parents explained to the doctor that Lacey had pretty extreme social anxiety and she also had severe autism. And they asked the doctor, is there anything we can do? Is there anything that we can do to help her? However, it seems like Lacey never got the help that she needed. She was sent back to her parents without any kind of treatment, and she would now never see a doctor again for the rest of her life. Lacey just went back to her reclusive life at her parents' home. And Lacey, as time was going on, was seen less and less outside of the home. Neighbors would occasionally see Lacey walking up and down the street holding weights in her hand, like doing some sort of exercise, but even that was like once in a blue moon. But when the neighbors did see Lacey walking up and down the street, they just saw her and she looked perfectly normal, perfectly healthy, no red flags. So no neighbors were ever concerned because Lacey appeared normal. There was no reason to think that there was anything strange going on in the Fletcher household. And this carried on for the next 5 years. This exact same routine. Lacey being homeschooled, Lacey rarely leaving the house and only occasionally being seen by neighbors. That was the routine for the next 5 years, which is crazy. However, when Lacey turned 21 years old, this is when all of a sudden she stopped appearing outside altogether. There was no walking up and down the street, no exercising, no grocery store visits, no doctor's visits, nothing. It was literally like Lacey just disappeared. To the outside world, Lacey basically was a missing person because nobody saw her. She just dropped off the face of the earth. And the worst thing about this is that no one seemed to pay attention to this. Nobody questioned, where was Lacey? Why isn't Lacey outside? Oh, I haven't seen Lacey in a while. Oh, my neighbours have a kid who's now technically a young adult. I wonder where she is. No one questioned anything. No extended family ever visited. No authorities ever visited. No one seemed to care about Lacey Fletcher. And this is where this case starts to get very strange and mysterious, because Lacey has pretty much disappeared, dropped off the face of the earth. No one now sees her. But what is strange about all of this is that her parents, Sheila and Clay, they carry on living a completely normal life. They were continuing on with their lives. I mean, they're very active in the community. They are respected pillars of the community, working for the council and blah, blah, blah. Everyone adored this couple. Everyone knew this couple. Clay still had his job as well. He checked in every day. The couple went to social gatherings. They were all happy and cheerful. If you just looked at this couple, you would think that everything was perfectly normal and fine. And Sheila, the one that works for the council, she was a very active Facebook user. She would post so much stuff on Facebook. She would post photos of herself and her husband attending social gatherings, going to sporting events, going to fancy dinners. She would constantly be updating all of her friends on Facebook about her life. But never, not once, did she mention her daughter, Lacey. Now, I'm sorry, that is suspicious as hell. Especially when someone is so active on social media, posting everything about their lives, and they have a daughter. Why didn't Sheila ever post anything about her daughter? Why didn't she update her friends on Facebook about what was happening with her daughter? Why was there never any mention of Lacey? And they attended so many social events, and you're telling me that Lacey was never included in any of them? Not one? It was almost like this couple forgot they had a daughter. There was no mention of Lacey, what she was doing as a 21-year-old young woman. And again, nobody seemed to care. Nobody asked about Lacey. All of these people on Facebook in the neighborhood, they know Sheila and Clay. And nobody asked about Lacey. Lacey just seemed to disappear from the face of the earth, and no one seemed to question it. Now, apparently, neighbours assumed that because Lacey was 21 years old when she disappeared, that it wasn't too strange that a young person had moved away from Slaughter. Maybe she's gone to college. Maybe she's just moved to a bigger city. Maybe she's met someone. Maybe she's married. That's apparently what all the neighbours were thinking in their head. But what was really strange is that yes, any of those things that I've just said could be true. But Lacey never visited. She never returned home. If she was at college, she never returned home for the holidays. She never brought her partner back to her family home to meet her parents. It's all just very strange. So where was Lacey? Had she gone to college? Had she moved away? Had she met someone? Well, the answer to all of those questions would be no. Lacey hadn't moved away. She was still living inside of her parents' home. She had never left the boundaries of that home. And was she being kept in the home against her own will? Well, according to Clay and Sheila, no, she wasn't. Clay and Sheila have stated that it was Lacey's decision. Lacey wanted to stay in the home. In fact, it was Lacey's decision not only to never leave the house, but Lacey didn't even want to leave the living room. That's right. Lacey never wanted to leave the four walls of the living room. So all day long, Lacey would just sit on the couch in the living room and she would not move, not even a muscle. And this was apparently Lacey's own decision. And Clay and Sheila have said that it was because Lacey was just too anxious. And at this point, Lacey had not stepped foot outside of her family home for 3 years. And then in 2010, Lacey is now 24 years old. This is when Sheila and Clay went to the doctor's office and they said they needed help. Clay stated that Lacey had developed all kinds of phobias, that she didn't want to leave the living room, that she didn't even want to leave the living room couch. Like she literally just didn't want to move. The couch in the living room had become her comfort zone. And when I say she didn't want to leave the couch, I mean she did not want to leave the couch. Sheila and Clay had to bring all of Lacey's meals to her on the couch. Lacey was also sleeping on the couch at night. Next to the couch was a stack of Disney DVDs that Sheila and Clay would put on for Lacey, and that was her only source of entertainment and mental stimulation. Lacey also wouldn't leave the sofa to shower or bathe herself. She was becoming incredibly dirty. Her hair was matted. She was starting to smell really bad. But that wasn't even the worst of it, because Lacey refused to leave the sofa to even go to the toilet. Her parents set up a portable toilet next to the sofa for Lacey, and they tried to encourage Lacey to get off the sofa, go to the portable toilet literally right next to the sofa and use it. But Lacey refused. Lacey was going to the toilet on the sofa. She would urinate and defecate on a towel that was placed on the sofa, and as you can imagine, this is not hygienic. This was getting incredibly messy, incredibly smelly, and it was getting to the point where Lacey's urine and her feces, it was getting all over her skin, all over her body, and this was causing incredibly painful rashes all over her body. And Clay and Sheila just left her in this mess. It's truly unbelievable. So Clay and Sheila went to their doctor's doctor's office and they said all of this to the doctor. They said that Lacey wouldn't leave the sofa, that she was going to the toilet on the sofa, that it was incredibly unhygienic, that she's got rashes all over her body. And the doctor recommended immediate and urgent hospitalization. The doctor even wanted to issue a commitment order just in case Lacey refused to leave the sofa. So they wanted this order in place to take Lacey against her will. However, for some reason, Clay and Sheila refused. They said that they didn't want Lacey going to the hospital. They said that Lacey was perfectly happy in her own home. Sheila and Clay also said that at this point, Lacey was still communicating with them and she never once expressed that she was in pain or that she was unhappy. So because Lacey apparently communicated that she was fine and she wasn't in pain and she wasn't in discomfort, her parents wanted everything to stay exactly how it was. And I feel like this right here was the opportunity to help Lacey. They went to the doctors, they informed the doctor of what was going on, and the doctor recommended that Lacey go to hospital because of the condition that she was in. That is what she needed. So why did her parents refuse this? But also, why didn't the doctor, like the authorities, intervene? Why wasn't a welfare check performed? Why didn't at least somebody go over to the house after being informed of the condition that she was in? It just does not make sense to me at all. In my opinion, this is the part of the case where Lacey's parents go from possibly trying to be helpful to now being willfully neglectful. And so because they refused to accept the help from the doctor, the situation was ignored. Authorities didn't do anything, Lacey's parents didn't do anything, and now Lacey's parents would go on to commit the most inhumane and worst neglect I think I've ever seen another human do to another human. Because this situation with Lacey apparently refusing to get off the sofa carries on for over a decade. You heard that right. The whole time, Lacey is literally just on the sofa. She does not leave that sofa. She doesn't leave it to eat, to sleep, to go to the toilet, to wash herself. No, everything happens on that sofa. And she is covered in her own urine and feces. And Clay and Sheila, what are they doing over this decade? Well, of course, they don't bloody care, do they? So they're carrying on with their lives. They still both go to work. You gotta remember that Sheila, she's the vice mayor at this point. They're still going to social gatherings, having fun with friends, going out for dinner. Sheila's posted on Facebook about her life. They even post a picture on Facebook of the Christmas tree that is in the same goddamn room as Lacey. Of course, Lacey is not in the photo, but oh my God, how can they do that? How can they just put up a Christmas tree like everything is bloody okay, post it on Facebook like their daughter is literally not rotting into the sofa next to them? And the occasional person would ask about Lacey, you know, just like small talk, chit chat. Oh, how's your daughter? And anytime anyone would ever do that, Clay and Sheila would just freeze up and want to change the conversation as quickly as possible. Clay and Sheila never willingly brought up their daughter in conversation, never talked about her, nothing, never offered up any information about her. And whenever she was asked about, they would just say, oh yeah, Lacey's fine, and change the topic of conversation. And tragically, because everyone thought that Lacey was okay, the situation just carries on. Lacey would now not be seen in public for the next 15 years. For 15 whole years, Clay and Sheila presented themselves as loving, proud parents. They went about their lives as if nothing was happening. And for those whole 15 years, Lacey was never seen by another human being apart from her parents. And then after those 15 years that Lacey was last seen in public, an absolutely horrific discovery was made. And I need to warn you now, going forward in this video is going to be incredibly distressing. I don't think I can emphasize enough how bad Lacey was neglected. Because we now skip to January of 2022, which was 15 years since Lacey was last seen in public. And at this point, Lacey would now be 36 years old. And this is when her mother, Sheila, made a very distressing call to 911. At 2 a.m. on the 3rd of January 2022, Sheila calls up 911, and the recording of this 911 call can be heard online, and wow, I've heard it.
911, where's your emergency? My emergency is my daughter's stopped breathing.
And on the phone, Sheila says to the operator that her daughter has stopped breathing. And Sheila, she does sound panicked, kind of, on this call. Not as panicked as she bloody should be considering the condition her daughter is in, but she does kind of sound panicked. And she says on the call that she doesn't really know what's going on. Her daughter has stopped breathing, that her daughter is an adult, and that she's just suddenly stopped eating. And I'm like, that's an interesting way to put it.
My daughter has stopped breathing. It's a long story. She had stopped eating. She's an adult. She wouldn't eat.
She actually says that it's, quote, a long story, and that her daughter has suddenly stopped eating. The operator asks how old her daughter is, and Sheila says, oh, she's in her 30s. Oh, she's 31. She's 31.
Okay, how old is she? She's in her 30s. How old is she? She's 31.
And I'm like, wow, really? I've literally just told you all that Lacey is 36 years old. Sheila can't even get the age of her daughter right. Like, who gets the age of their daughter wrong by 5 years? So the 911 call carries on, and the operator says to Sheila that she needs to get Lacey onto the floor so she can start chest compressions. So Sheila is there and she instructs Clay to get Lacey on the floor. However, Clay responds that he is unable to get Lacey off of the sofa.
Where is she located? She's on the couch here in the living room. Okay, we need to try to get her onto the floor. On the floor. Get her on the floor. Get on the floor. And we can't get her on the floor.
And there is a very good reason for this, so remember this. So Clay starts to give Lacey chest compressions with Lacey still on the sofa. And then a deputy sheriff soon arrives at the home. And when they arrive to Clay performing the chest compressions to Lacey, and Lacey is still on the sofa. And just at the sight of Lacey on this sofa, it was the worst thing that this deputy sheriff has ever seen in their life. And they knew that they were not the right person. They were not equipped to deal with this, and they needed to phone a coroner. So the coroner, Dr. Bickham, soon arrives, and when they walk into the living room, they were horrified. The coroner walked into that house, and the smell coming from the house, in particular the living room, was the worst smell they have ever smelled in their whole life. And you've got to remember that they're a coroner. They smell death all the time in various different degrees and forms, but this smell coming from Lacey, coming from this home, was the worst thing that they have ever smelled in their life, and that tells you a lot. The coroner said that it smelled like a sewer, a septic tank, urine, feces, blood, and rotting flesh all at once. So just imagine the strongest, worst smells that you can think of all at the same time, times 1,000. The coroner said that the smell was so bad that they started heaving straight away, and the air was thick. And this was before the coroner even saw Lacey. So the coroner walks further into the house, and in the kitchen he finds Clay and Sheila. Clay was stood there with a vacant expression on his face. He was just completely emotionless. Sheila was on the floor with her head between her knees, and she looked completely traumatized. The parents then directed the coroner into the living room, which is obviously where Lacey was, and the sight that greeted Dr. Bickham was just out of this world. It's actually hard to put into words and describe to you all what Lacey looked like and the scene that coroner found. And I have got to give another warning here, because I am going to be inserting some photos, not of Lacey. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to insert some photos of the sofa that she was found in, because it's truly indescribable, like what she was found on, like the sofa, the condition that it was in. But they are very distressing to see. It's just hard to see these photos of the sofa, of the condition of the sofa, and remember that a person was sat on that sofa in that same position for 15 years. Literally rotting away. And it truly was almost the most bizarre image that the coroner walked into, because he walked into the living room and the sofa was in the middle of the room, but everything else around the sofa looked normal, eerily normal. There was a side table with a lamp on it. There were photos on the wall. It just looked like any regular normal family living room, apart from the sofa that was in the living room that obviously had Lacey on top of it. So this sofa, it was completely covered in human urine and feces, to the point where the leather on the couch had burnt away because there was so much human urine and feces all over it. The leather had pretty much, from a good portion of the sofa, had pretty much disappeared. The sofa foam was exposed, and even some of that had completely like melted and burnt away. All that was left of the sofa was this big gaping hole that was covered in thick human feces. And the sight of this sofa alone is so horrific. And the photos that I am showing you in this video are obviously the photos after Lacey was removed from the sofa. So in that photo, just imagine a human in that hole. And that is what Dr. Bickham discovered. He discovered Lacey's body on that sofa in that hole. And Lacey was just sat there in the middle of all of this urine and feces. And if you think that the sofa was in a bad condition, that is nothing compared to what Lacey was in. Lacey's body was a million times worse. And of course, I will not be showing photos of Lacey's body in this video, but I do just need to warn you, if you Google this case, there are photos of Lacey's body out there, and they're pretty easy to stumble across. Most of them are blurred, but even the blurred photos are distressing. So just be warned, if you Google this case, especially if you go on images, if you really dive into this case, you possibly will come across the most distressing images you will ever see in your life. So when Dr. Bickham laid his eyes on Lacey's body, the first thing that he thought was, oh my God, this is the worst state I have ever seen a human body. And again, he's a coroner. He has seen a lot. He has seen bodies in all kinds of conditions that have been decaying for weeks, that have been left in like water and all stuff like that. Like, he's seen a lot. He's seen everything. At least he thought he had seen everything until he saw Lacey's body. One of the first things that Dr. Bickham noticed was that Lacey was only wearing a t-shirt. She had no trousers on, no underwear, no bra, nothing but a t-shirt. And it was just a small blue t-shirt. So everything from the waist down was completely exposed. And also what is incredibly distressing is that her t-shirt was pulled up so her breasts were exposed, and I don't know why that would be. She was also incredibly malnourished. Her bones were protruding. She weighed only 96 pounds, which is approximately half of a woman of her age should weigh. She actually weighed closer to a 12-year-old than a 36-year-old. Her frame was also incredibly small and shriveled. It was literally like she had shrunk into the sofa, which she basically had, because that hole in that sofa is pretty big and she was in the hole. And Lacey was just sat in this hole. She was covered in feces. And the way Lacey was sat was her legs were crossed. So like, you know, when you sit on the floor, you cross your legs. That is how Lacey was sat on the sofa. And she was just sat up and she was slightly slumped over, but it was just so creepy. Her eyes were open, her mouth was open, and she was just sat there. And the hole in the sofa was that deep that she was almost buried up to her shoulders in this sofa. It was also apparent that she had pretty normal and healthy teeth in her mouth. And the overwhelming thing that Dr. Bickham saw, which I've said a million times already, was just urine and feces. And there was that much that the urine and feces had actually started to pool under the sofa. But even worse was the condition of Lacey's skin and hair. The condition that Lacey was in is possibly the worst thing I've ever heard in my whole entire life, because she was covered head to toe in her own feces, both fresh, liquid, and some that had dried and crusted. Fecal matter was crushed into her face, chest, and stomach. It was smeared pretty much over her entire body, on her breasts, her buttocks, and her back. Her ears were extremely dirty and also crusted with fecal matter. It was also found inside of her nose and inside of her mouth. Feces was also found completely matted into her hair. Her hair had actually matted into a 20 by 20 inch ball. Like, her hair was just matted in a ball on her head, and there was no way that it could be untangled. It was literally just sat there on her head, and it was matted because it was so full of feces, which is just hard to even imagine, isn't it? Her scalp was red and crusted. Her face was covered in large red angry blisters and blotches. Her fingernails were also extremely long and dirty, and fecal matter was found underneath her fingernails. Her toenails were also incredibly long and curled over. Again, fecal matter was found under her toenails. But if that wasn't bad enough, Lacey was also covered in maggots. They were crawling all over her skin. They were eating into her flesh. She was covered in all sorts of insect bites. There were live bugs around her, and there was rodent excrement right next to her. The bugs had even made their way into her ears, and they had started to eat away her flesh inside of her ears. And what is just incredibly distressing is that the maggots all over her body, it was discovered that they had started to eat her flesh when Lacey was still alive. Lacey was covered in so much urine and feces, and she was so dirty that the bugs, the maggots, were attracted to her skin, and they had started to eat her flesh before she had even died. And who knows how long they were eating on her flesh whilst she was alive. It could have been weeks. It could have been months. I even saw that it could have even been years. She had maggot infestations in her ears, and there was also a big swarm of maggots all over her genitals. And when Dr. Bingham moved closer to Lacey's body, this is when he made probably the most shocking discovery of all, as if things can't get any worse than they are. Because this is when Dr. Bingham realized that Lacey Fletcher was fused to the sofa. Lacey had literally melted and was attached to the sofa. Her skin had completely melted and burnt away from all of the urine and feces that was covering her, which left Lacey with these large exposed wounds. So then these exposed wounds, this sticky skin, then latched itself onto the sofa, grabbed itself onto the leather and the sofa foam, and then when that skin started to dry, Lacey's skin then dried onto the sofa, and Lacey's skin became entwined into the sofa. And that is just so hard for me to wrap my head around. So Lacey was literally attached to the sofa. I'm not being dramatic there. She literally was attached to the sofa. Her skin was completely fused into the sofa. And that is why on the 911 call, when the operator said, you need to get Lacey off of the sofa onto the floor and start the chest compressions, that is why Clay was unable to move Lacey from the sofa, because she was literally attached and fused to the sofa. And then because Lacey had these large gaping exposed wounds, her skin had started to decompose whilst she was still alive. Lacey also had large bed sores on her buttocks because she had not been moved from the sofa for that long. And her bed sores were that bad that her buttocks had completely just disappeared. There was no skin, there was no muscle, there was no tissue. It was just bones. Now, bed sores are extremely painful and they're really hard to treat. And I feel like when you say, oh, someone's got a bed sore, I don't really feel like that sounds extreme enough for what bed sores actually are. But basically a bed sore is when if somebody hasn't moved a part of their body for so long, pressure on that skin will cause a lack of blood flow to that area of the skin. And it causes that area of the skin, that part, to literally just die. And that is why patients in hospitals, in care homes, in nursing homes, or at home, if they're immobile, they're not able to move themselves. That is why those patients have to be moved to prevent bed sores, because they are serious. And that is why Lacey's bed sores were so bad, because she hadn't moved for 15 years. Her buttocks had deteriorated to the point where there was literally just bones. There was also bed sores on the back of her head. She was covered in pressure ulcers. She even had sofa fibers and maggots embedded into the surface of her bones. And I don't think I've ever heard of anything so horrific and awful. I don't even feel like those words are strong enough to describe the condition that Lacey was in. It is completely inhumane. She was literally just left to rot into the sofa. She was decomposing whilst she was alive, and her parents just allowed it to happen. They were living in the same home, posing for photos next to the Christmas tree with Lacey there, literally decomposing and dying in front of their eyes. So at this point now, Dr. Bingham has been carrying out his inspection of Lacey and just the whole situation for about an hour now. And he's just really struggling to comprehend what is even in front of him. And very sadly, at 3:07 a.m. on the 3rd of January 2022, this is when Lacey Fletcher was formally pronounced dead. However, the death wasn't ruled as an accident. It was ruled as a homicide. And immediately the parents, Clay and Sheila, were arrested and taken into custody. Now, this is when an autopsy was carried out on Lacey's body, and it was discovered that the cause of death was sepsis. And this sepsis had been caused by a load of different things. She had a bone marrow infection due to all of the ulcers all over her body, and she also had infections from her incredibly poor hygiene. She was also extremely malnourished. She had chronic protein malnutrition and acute starvation. Like I already said, her weight was half the amount that it should have been. And I accidentally came across a photo of Lacey on the autopsy table, and the sight was truly traumatizing. She just looks so frail. Like, I just don't even know how she survived as long as she did, looking like that. And the doctor performing the autopsy has also said that Lacey's body was in the worst state he has ever seen a human body. It's literally like Lacey was rotting away inside of her body whilst she was still alive. The autopsy revealed that Lacey's legs had also frozen into position. She had something called contractures, which is where the muscles and the tendons stiffen up, leaving you unable to move that body part. And Lacey had developed contractures because she had sat in a cross-legged position for so long. So even if she wanted to move, she couldn't. The autopsy also revealed that Lacey had COVID at the time of her death, on top of a whole host of other infections. There were large, raw, yellow areas all over her body where her skin had just disappeared. Her back and buttocks area was completely blackened, making it unable to identify any kind of shape or form. Like, they had just disappeared. They were not even there. And when the coroner examined Lacey's stomach, and prepare yourselves for this, all they found in Lacey's stomach was sofa foam and feces. Yeah, you heard that right. The only nutrition that Lacey was getting leading up to her death was Lacey eating her own feces and sofa foam. That is what she was eating in order to survive. And that fact alone just breaks your heart. To think how desperate Lacey was, especially in those last few weeks or months, however long, that she was forced to eat her own feces and parts of the sofa. And her parents were living in the house, living a normal life. It's mind-boggling. How could they do this to their daughter? And then there was one more final shocking revelation from the autopsy, and that was how long was Lacey in this state? How long has she been on this sofa, covered in her own excrement, unable to move, wasting away, literally rotting and melting into the sofa? And the answer to that question is 12 whole years. The autopsy revealed that Lacey had not moved from that sofa for even a second for 12 years. And I don't know how they determined that. I don't even know what to say to that. To think of Lacey stuck on the sofa, not being able to move for 12 years, whilst her parents just went about their lives. There are no words to describe the evil that her parents are. So after this autopsy, authorities obviously had a lot of questions for Clay and Sheila. But unbelievably, they were granted bail. Their bail was set at $300,000, which required them to pay $72,000 in cash, which they did, and they got released on bail. And this really, really infuriates me, because it's like, wow, you have just managed to pull together $72,000 just like that. If you have that much money, like, available to you, why are you not using it to treat your daughter? It is insane that they literally let their daughter rot away on the sofa when they clearly have a decent amount of money and they could have used that to help her. And this next bit, this really, really angers me, because we all know how much Sheila likes to use Facebook. And for the past 15 years, which is how long Lacey has been stuck in that house, on the sofa for 12, but in the house for 15, Sheila has never once posted about her daughter. No picture, nothing. But now that her daughter's dead, now that she has been released on bail, Sheila has the audacity to post on Facebook, quote, "Mom and Dad love you so much." That makes my blood boil. They're clearly just trying to keep up appearances. So then 2 weeks later, Clay and Sheila have obviously been out on bail, still going about their normal lives. They were finally brought in for questioning. So the interview started, and this is what the parents had to say for themselves. So they started off and said that all of this everything with Lacey started in 2010. And this is when Clay and Sheila were the amazing parents and went to the doctors. Do you remember that? And the doctor advised that Lacey should be hospitalized immediately. And this is when Clay and Sheila went, no, don't want to do that. So then this is when Clay and Sheila said that Lacey was now refusing to move off the sofa. Clay and Sheila said that the sofa was Lacey's safe comfort zone, and that because of Lacey's severe autism and social anxiety, she did not want to move off of that sofa. And they, being very good parents, didn't want to force Lacey into doing anything that she wasn't comfortable with or that she didn't want to do. So they just left Lacey sat there on the sofa because this was Lacey's decision. This is Lacey's doing. They wanted to make that very important, that this had nothing to do with them. Lacey made the decisions herself, and Lacey was an adult, so Lacey can do what she wants. Apparently, they did try and encourage Lacey to move off the sofa, especially when it came to using the toilet, but Lacey refused. And their response was, well, what are we supposed to do? And the officers doing the interview were like, so you didn't call a doctor? You didn't try and get help in any kind of way? You just abandoned your daughter on the sofa? And I just want to remind you all here that Sheila especially, she works in law enforcement and she is the vice mayor of the town. She is one of the spokespeople for that town to advocate for the people in that town. Yet she can't even advocate for her own goddamn daughter. She was in a position where she could have helped her daughter very easily. And they also had the money to help her. And Sheila responded to the officers saying that, well, what could they do? Lacey wasn't sick. And I'm like, wow. How can you say that she's not sick? She was literally rotting away from the inside whilst she is still alive. Bed sores all over her body. Her skin is melting off. That's only a few of the things that were going on. How can you say she's not sick? And then this is when Sheila claimed that for the last 12 years, so whilst Lacey was on the sofa, Sheila had been caring for Lacey every single day. Apparently Sheila would prepare breakfast for Lacey and take it to the sofa. Sheila would also come home from work at lunchtime to feed Lacey her lunch. They would eat dinner together in the living room. Sheila also claimed that she would dress Lacey every day and that Sheila was aware that there were some sores on her body. So she tried to help out the sores. She would clean them using a saline wash and zinc, and she had all the creams and lotions and stuff. She would rub lotion into Lacey's skin to keep it moisturized. You know, she was like a really good mom. And apparently, Lacey never complained during this cleaning and moisturizing process that Sheila would do. Lacey never complained that she was in any discomfort or pain. And from one of the crime scene photos, you can actually see like more of the living room, and there is like a coffee table, and it is full of lotions and creams and wipes and baby powder. So you can see all of the products that Sheila is claiming to use on Lacey every day, but she's not exactly doing a good job, is she? If she is using them. You can also see piles of clean clothes all over the floor and a stack of Disney DVDs. In fact, and I do not believe this for 1 second, Sheila also claimed that she slept on the sofa every night with Lacey. And I'm like, no, I don't believe that. I'm sorry. Sheila did not sleep on that sofa. Sheila did not sleep on that sofa that was covered in feces. I'm sorry, she didn't. And something that I found really chilling is that I went onto Google Maps to look at the town and everything and look at the house that this happened in. And you know, on Google Maps, you can go back in time and look at the houses from like different dates. You can actually see Lacey's house and what she was living in on the street view from May of 2011. So that was when Lacey was stuck on the sofa, because Lacey had been on that sofa since 2010. So Lacey had already been stuck on that sofa for a year. And I found that so chilling and so sad. Just seeing that house and knowing that Lacey is inside of that house, stuck on the sofa. And it's just so eerie to think about, like people just going about their lives, not having a clue what's actually going on inside of that house. And Lacey has already been on that sofa for a year when that Google car went past and she would be stuck on that sofa for another 11 years. It just breaks my heart. And when police ask Clay and Sheila about the days leading up to Lacey's death, well, Sheila said that Lacey was completely normal up until that point. They said that Lacey was, quote, sound of mind, that she had all of her mental faculties, and that the only difference they had noticed is that Lacey was just eating a bit less. However, Sheila did say that Lacey was still eating though, like she was still eating small amounts, even in the moments up until her death. Sheila even said that Lacey ate half a sandwich and some Cheetos the day before she died. However, what Sheila didn't realise is that an autopsy can pick up what the person has eaten. And there was not a single trace of food found in Lacey's stomach apart from feces and sofa foam. So that whole story that Lacey had eaten the day before her death was a lie. And when the interview ended, this is when the police had to try and make sense of what the hell happened. This is also when the story broke to the media on this case and it was making headlines everywhere.
We begin with a case that has been hard for even the most seasoned investigators to forget: the death of Lacey Fletcher.
Which I can understand. I mean, when it happened, I was seeing it everywhere, all over social media, because this is definitely one of the most shocking cases of recent times. It's just one of those cases where it just doesn't even seem real. Like, how has someone been stuck on a sofa for 12 years? Like, how the hell does that happen? And when the story first broke to the media, it was initially reported that Lacey had a condition called locked-in syndrome, which is a neurological condition which causes complete paralysis of the muscles, which basically means that you're unable to move, but your brain is still functioning. It's just your muscles, your body that can't move, and people believe that Lacey was suffering with this, and that explained why she hadn't moved from the sofa for 12 years. However, it was soon clarified by doctors working on the case that Lacey did not have this condition. Lacey has never suffered with locked-in syndrome. It's just complete misinformation. Lacey was only ever suffering with severe autism and social anxiety. There was no other medical diagnosis that could explain what happened to Lacey. So how can you explain what happened to Lacey? And the unfortunate answer is we just don't know. There is no concrete evidence or answer as to what exactly happened. The only information that we have is the small bits of testimony from Clay and Sheila, and they are definitely not reliable. But apart from what Clay and Sheila have said, we have no idea exactly what was happening for those 12 years that Lacey was stuck on the sofa. Now, of course, when people don't know answers, people obviously speculate, and I have seen theories online, and the most likely theory is that Lacey was not in the horrendous condition that she was found in. She was not in that condition for the whole 12 years. She was obviously on the sofa for 12 years, but she was not in the extreme, terrible state that she was found in, because she had so many bed sores and open wounds, and like her muscles were gone in places, and she had maggots and bugs all over her. And the fact that she died from sepsis and other infections, if she was in that state for 12 years, she wouldn't have survived for 12 years. She would have passed away from infections, etc. a lot sooner. But it's thought that the infections and everything, etc., only got worse in more recent times. And people have speculated that it might have gotten worse because of lockdown in 2020, which was around 18 months before Lacey did pass away. And that kind of makes sense to me, because there was an increase in neglect and abuse cases over lockdown, because the world was in lockdown. You didn't have to leave your house. There was no prying eyes. You didn't have to keep up appearances for anyone. And it does make sense to me that because of lockdown, Sheila and Clay, they no longer had to leave the house and go to work, etc. And they didn't have to keep up appearances. They just started to care less and less about Lacey. And I think the most likely theory behind this is that this all did stem from Lacey's social anxiety. I think it's very plausible that Lacey, because of her social anxiety, maybe she didn't want to leave the house. Maybe she didn't even want to leave the living room, leave the sofa. Maybe the sofa was her safe comfort zone. And then maybe Lacey was sitting on the sofa for too long. Is this how she developed contractures? Was she sitting too long and her muscles completely stiffened up to the point where she actually couldn't move? So she couldn't even move even if she wanted to. And then her parents, just being neglectful, just left her there. Had no interest in helping their daughter out of this situation. Either way, whatever happened, because I don't think we'll ever truly know what happened, because I don't think Clay and Sheila are ever going to talk, because they don't want to tarnish their reputation. They're always going to stick with the story that there was nothing they could do. It was Lacey's decision. She was not in pain, blah, blah, blah. But regardless of what happened, I just can't wrap my head around this case. I can't wrap my head around the fact that her parents just left her, abandoned her, and left her on the sofa for 12 years and didn't even bother to help. They never got her hospitalized. They refused the treatment when she was offered it. And they never went to see a doctor for 12 years, which was the whole time she was on the sofa. They just left her there, sat in her own excrement, just left to melt and rot into that sofa. So then the couple were released on bail, awaiting trial. And a whole 18 months passed between them being questioned and their trial, and they just went back to their normal lives. I mean, not exactly went back to their normal lives because, they're evil and everyone knows it now, but still they were allowed to live their lives, which I'm like, what the actual hell? And they were charged with second-degree murder. They were indicted by a grand jury, and they pleaded not guilty because, they think they've done nothing wrong, and they were just left to live their lives whilst they awaited trial. But then in February of 2024, just before their trial was supposed to start, they decided to arrange a plea deal because things were not looking good for the evil parents. And the plea deal reduced their charge to manslaughter instead of second-degree murder, and they pled no contest. And then after the plea deal and everything, the attorney of Sheila and Clay put out a statement saying that both Clay and Sheila loved their daughter Lacey to death. That is an interesting choice of words. The couple then went on to say that they are incredibly remorseful and that they never intended to harm their daughter. Their life apparently revolved around Lacey. They did nothing but care for her daily. Clay and Sheila basically insinuated that they were just carrying out Lacey's wishes, and this was all what Lacey wanted, essentially putting all of the blame on Lacey. In the end, the judge sentenced both Clay and Sheila to 40 years in prison, with 20 years suspended, meaning that they only need to serve 20 years behind bars, which is not long enough if you ask me, and they will both be out of prison in their 80s. And I just have no words for this case. It's just so infuriating. Like, I literally hate Clay and Sheila so much. How could they go about their daily lives, like living their life, going out for dinner, hanging out with friends, going to work, knowing that their daughter is stuck on the sofa and knowing that both of them have the money and the power to get their daughter help? How could they just carry on living their lives like that for 12 years? 15 if you want to include the 3 years prior where Lacey wouldn't leave the house. And I feel so sorry for Lacey. It seems like she still had her mental faculties right up until the very end, which means that it is highly likely that she was aware of everything. She was aware of the pain that she was in every day, aware that it was her parents doing this to her, her parents refusing to get her help. Was she wondering why her parents had literally just abandoned her? Was she having conversations with them? Was she even able to talk near the end? We don't know. There are so many unanswered questions in this case. And I don't think we'll ever get the answers because, like I said, Clay and Sheila are not going to talk, are they? Because they are never going to admit their part in this case because they care too much about their reputation. So this case really is a big mystery, but we know that what Lacey went through was the most inhumane neglect that a person could go through. And she suffered that at the hands of her own parents. And I want to end this video focusing on the victim of today's case, Lacey Fletcher. Lacey Fletcher was described as being kind, thoughtful, and just the sweetest person you could meet. She loved country music, Disney movies, and she had an amazing group of friends when she was in school. Everyone thought the absolute world of her. But tragically, she slowly got separated from these friends. She was completely abandoned by her own parents. No one seemed to care about Lacey in the end, and it ended in one big tragedy. Her life was cut tragically short. Lacey deserved so much better. She was only 36 years old. As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions, and don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Audible for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.